and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Forum on Nuclear Safety and Nuclear Governance for the Next Generation. Featuring today an extraordinary speaker, International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi, in a conversation with New York Times White House correspondent and National Security correspondent, David Sanger. My name is Francesca Giovannini. I'm the Executive Director of the Managing the Atom Project at the Belfer Center. And before we begin, I really want to thank Institute of Politics and the Forum for this extraordinary cooperation in hosting what will prove to be an exciting, informative, and really, really important conversation with the Director General. Let me thank Mark Guerin, the Director of the Institute of Politics, Nanda Chitrer, the Director of the John F. Kennedy Forum, and Kathy Park, who is a firehouse, a great coordinator of the forum, who actually kept us all in line and well organized for this event. Now, let me turn to introduce the speaker. And I have to say, it is almost impossible to overstate the impact that DG Grossi had on the world of nuclear diplomacy. In his long 35 years career, he has virtually served at the highest echelons of all international nuclear fora and organization. He served as Assistant Director General for Policy, and he was the Chief of Cabinet at the IAEA under Amano's tenure. He presided over the diplomatic conference of the Convention on Nuclear Safety, which ultimately adopted the Vienna Declaration on Nuclear Safety, which is probably the milestone of international efforts in the wake of the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. And we know that nuclear safety is an issue that is very, very close to his heart. He also served as the president of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and in 2019, he acted as president designated of the 2020 Review Conference of the Parties to the NPT, a position that, however, he did not serve because he was elected as DG of the IAEA. Now, at the Kennedy School, we talk often about what makes great leaders and what makes the rise of leaders that ultimately meet the moment and the challenges of the organizations that they end up serving. I want to give you just two examples of why I think DG Grossi will shape the future of nuclear diplomacy, not only by serving, of course, at the IAEA, but by thinking very, very analytically and concretely about what the nuclear field needs today and in the future. I want to point at a couple of points, particularly for students who might be interested one day in serving in the IAEA. DG Grossi joined the Gender Champion in 2017. And under his leadership, it is very likely that the IAEA will become the first international organization to reach gender parity in a few years. This is not a result that should be taken for granted. A technical organization reaching gender parity will have an extraordinary momentum for other international organizations to follow suit. And I know for a fact, by talking to his staff, that he has taken so seriously his commitment that he has actually really promoted nuclear and gender diversity and diversity in general, also in the recruitment of new staff at the IAEA. And finally, 6 months after the outbreak of COVID, the IAEA was able to launch one of the most important, I would say, development initiatives to actually prepare the international community for future pandemics. And this is, of course, the initiative of Zodiac that has attracted a lot of attention, a lot of funding from member states and beyond. I have to say, DG, is very difficult to overestimate the impact you've had across the board in so many different sectors and questions. But I think your leadership really should inspire people to think about a nuclear career, because nuclear touches so many important sectors in our life today. Now, to capture your immense expertise, we thought we couldn't actually do less than recruiting the very best in journalism. And that's why we went and we begged David Sanger. I sent him multiple emails, which he tried to disregard, tried to beg him to moderate this forum, because we know David is not only probably embeds the best form of journalism, but he is somebody who engages intellectually, analytically, and honestly with questions that really matter at the national and international level. Now, David has been at the New York Times for 30 years. He has covered foreign policy, globalization, nuclear proliferation. I have to mention that I discovered yesterday that he was on a member of two teams that won the Pulitzer Prize. And one of them was in the covering of the Japanese tsunami and nuclear disaster in 2011. And in 2012, he was the one who broke the story that President Obama, early in his presidency, has secretly commissioned the Stuxnet, a cyber attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. His latest book is The Perfect Weapon, War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We are also very delighted to have David as a professor at Harvard. He's teaching a class with Graham Allison on central challenges of American national security, strategy, and the press. David, over to you, and Director General, it's absolutely wonderful to see you, and welcome to Harvard.
Well, thank you very much, Francesca, and thank you for that introduction. And it's wonderful to be here with my friend Rafael Grossi and to talk about nuclear safety and the other agenda items on the list. I want to thank Mark Guerin for his great leadership at the Institute of Politics, and to Nanda for keeping the forum going in challenging times here amid COVID and all that, and Kathy and Francesca for their great work. Mr. Director General, I think the way we're going to organize the conversation will be, I want to start on some of the range of nuclear safety issues with you. Directly to this conversation. I think given the events of the past week and a half and your trip to Iran, our audience will be interested to hear on your observations about your trip and where all of that is headed. I'm going to ask you about some other nuclear challenges and inspection challenges you're facing, including North Korea and so forth. And then, of course, we're going to do the best part, which is I'm going to get out of the way and let the students at you, for which I can't help you. As somebody who teaches here, I can tell you their questions will be a lot tougher than mine. So let's dive right in. You've now been in your job for roughly a year and a half. And of course, you're no newcomer to the IAEA and all of its different challenges, both on the safety side and the inspection side. Let me just ask you to begin with, you came into this job, and I know from our own conversations that you thought you understood what it was, but what's been your biggest surprise as you have had to go take this organization over and then try to conduct your activities in the past year in the midst of pandemic?
Well, thank you, David. Great to be here with you again, to see you and to talk with you. Let me say that in terms of my taking over the help at the IAEA, there were little secrets and surprises in terms of the house, the mission, and what this place does. As Francesca was reminding us, I had in a previous incarnation been here as a chief of cabinet for my predecessor and Assistant Director General for Policy. So it was a house that I knew. And I've been doing nuclear and non-proliferation diplomacy. My first meeting here in Vienna was when I was a young third secretary from Argentina. And I came here in 1985, I believe. So I knew. But of course, the big surprise was also your biggest surprise and everybody's biggest surprise. And it was the pandemic. I come to take the directorship general of an international organization, and all of a sudden the world collapses. You cannot fly, you cannot send out your inspectors, you don't know what's going to happen, and especially when you have hot potatoes like Iran or DPRK or many other cases, including safety, security, and frankly, you are confronted with a completely new situation, one you were not expecting 2 months into your new job. So that was more than a surprise, and I think it proves once again that famous phrase that with crisis sometimes come opportunities. Or you make them into opportunities. And this is what I try to do. First of all, I had a first decision, very important decision to make, which was, should we stop? Of course, we have the best reason to do that. other international inspectorates did just that. Of course, safety considerations, it's difficult to travel out there. What do you do? So you make a pause. And the first message I had was, we are not going to stop for a single minute. We are going to be sending our inspectors, and we are going to be present everywhere, knowing, of course, that continuity of knowledge in terms of non-proliferation is essential. That was easier said than done, because as you can imagine, countries were closing down, and border control became very, very hard and impenetrable. So I had to do a lot of convincing of many foreign ministers and other ministers, telling them, you can't stop. We can do whatever it takes. We can go into quarantine, but we are going to the places, and we are going to be inspecting. So that was the first big decision I had to take. And the second, which we may discuss if there is interest, because it has to do with other issues like the pandemic, as Francesca was reminding, was to say, what can we do? In what way, apart from doing our job in spite of the difficulties, can we, from the IAEA, do something about this? And of course we could. We could, because the agency had been doing some work with the Food and Agricultural Organization in Rome, the FAO, on zoonosis, although albeit as a small, relatively small scale. And I spoke with my friend, the DG of the FAO, and also with Dr. Tedros, who became, of course, a world celebrity at the WHO because of all these things. And I told them, well, from our nuclear technology, nuclear science applications, there are things we can do. And then we started this project that is called Zodiac, for zoonotic disease integrated action, and we are moving with that. So perhaps that's an apt answer to your first question.
So on the safety side of your agenda, you come to this with, of course, the history when you were quite young of Chernobyl, which has been replayed for a generation in that fascinating series that you saw run. And then Fukushima, which of course you lived through each and every day in trying to manage. And, after Chernobyl, I think many people thought that a Fukushima-like event was not possible. And after Fukushima, you saw a huge retreat from nuclear energy among, certainly in Japan, but even among other nations. So I'm wondering, now that you've taken this job over, you've had a chance now to review the safety protocols and the lessons of Fukushima. What do you draw from the Fukushima experience that we need to know for both nations that are experienced at managing their nuclear enterprises and for the newcomers?
Well, I think the big break in terms of nuclear safety has been around, and it was envisaged already in the minds of the founding fathers of the IAEA. When you take the statute of the IAEA, you will see provision there for nuclear safety. So it was not something that was discovered after Chernobyl or after Fukushima, for that matter. I believe that in systemic terms and in historical terms, the bigger, perhaps not the biggest, but the bigger change came after Chernobyl, because after Chernobyl, there was a realization that on these issues, you should go global in a world which was not yet global. In fact, it's fascinating to see that Chernobyl comes when Gorbachev was starting the experience of glasnost and perestroika. And the first reaction, I mean, you mentioned the series, which I think is pretty good, but looking at the scientific papers, we could also see that. There was in the Soviet Union like a doubt, try to hide, in the end you couldn't. My illustrious predecessor, Hans Blix, of course, learned it from his Swedish connationals who called him on the phone and told him, listen, there is something fishy going on here. So this is how it started. And then you could see like the agency, and I was present. I came as a young delegate, and we were all fascinated to be listening to these incredible stories from the Soviet experts. So the big carrier started to move and to change, and quite fast. The IAEA adopted a couple of conventions. We're not here to talk about treaties. It's very boring, but there was one on early notification. Of course, at the time, at this age of smartphones, where you could see the accident here on the phone, this early notification thing sounds a little bit passé. Huh? Okay, but at that time, it was very important that if something happens, then you tell us, and then we'll mobilize. And then there was another convention on cooperation. Then we should cooperate. So it was a wake-up call into the necessity of a global approach to nuclear safety. All habits die hard normally in everything, but also in this world of nuclear. And there is always this mantra that nuclear safety, of course, is a national responsibility. Of course it is, because a nuclear power plant, which sits in the United States or in Argentina or in Italy, or no, in Italy they don't have it. But anywhere, of course, it's the country that has to ensure these things. But there is an ever increasing work at a global scale, because, of course, the whole thing is as strong as the weakest link, which is quite an obvious thing. So I would say, to come back to your original question, for me, Chernobyl was a bigger cultural and institutional change. Fukushima perhaps was a reminder of a need for strict observance of standards and strengthen them. Actually, it is important to go to the documents and see that what happened at that time was to a certain extent, because of lack of observance of recommendations that the IAEA had made to Japan before, including at a time of a previous earthquake that had impacted the Kashiwazaki Kariwa.
But there was also, if I recall at the time, a tendency by the Japanese authorities to shut down information, what they knew, the measurements they were taking. As you know, I lived in Japan for 6 years, long before Fukushima. I had to call back to sources of mine, and they were telling us that they couldn't get real numbers out of their own government. The U.S. government ended up putting one of its sensors up to see whether or not it could pick up much of what was going on. And that was with an ally. So that would tell you, when you say old habits die hard, has the world really established out of Fukushima a concept of real transparency into this kind of accidents?
I think we are much closer to one that where we used to be. It would be perhaps too much, David, to say that we have, because there are issues of national prestige, there are issues of national politics that may, and God willing, we will not facing something like this in the future, but no one can exclude it. Accidents are accidents, and accidents happen. But I think that we are, the level of discussion with regulators, we work with them, with national regulators, and we are like a hub for the national regulators and other instances like the committees on safety standards, and we talk a lot about that. And I think that we are much closer to that, but we are not there yet. We are not there yet.
You and I have talked a lot before about the intersection of cyber and nuclear safety, and this is a new challenge for all of you. We've seen some disturbing cases of cyber attacks on overall power grids. and a few individual cases, fortunately not terribly harmful thus far, of cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, which were never initially built to be connected to networks. The control rooms were really sealed off, and which today are. And we've seen cases around the world, particularly in the pandemic, where you have to have people actually operating elements of power grids from home. So tell me a little bit about how you've adopted to the cyber age here.
Well, I think that the work on cyber security, this is like in the family of nuclear security, not so much in the family of nuclear safety, although it is, there is all this a bit, discussion, a bit strange discussion between nuclear safety and nuclear security. For those who are participating, nuclear safety is more about the operation of a plant and avoiding accidents, and nuclear security is to avoid that nuclear material or nuclear power plants are used in a hostile manner to cause a great dissemination of radionuclides or nuclear material.
Or the middle ground, which is a cyber attacker simply seeking to shut down a network, as a political message, which falls somewhere between those two.
Exactly. What I can tell you is that there's been a very dedicated effort on cyber. We have experts that are completely dedicated to that. There are groups working specifically on that, technical documents devoted only to that. So I don't think we are lagging behind. But of course, it is a matter where the boundaries and the limits of national sovereignty and confidentiality sometimes conspire against a greater degree of international cooperation. But on a theoretical basis, I think there's enough work and a lot of common elements already.
You've initiated some efforts, particularly in the global south, for moving towards small nuclear reactors.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and whether you think that might overcome some of the hesitance that we've seen post-Fukushima about the use of nuclear energy.
I think more than filling the gap or the demand or a safety concern, what I see is SMRs seen as an energy or even economic booster. When I see ministers of energy of African countries or Latin American countries or Caribbean countries or some in Asia, developing countries in Asia, what I can sense is that they are eager to see whether with these SMRs they can have energy solutions. So the axis of SMR goes more towards the issue of nuclear energy and energy solutions more than to the safety kind of problem or preoccupation, if this is the preoccupation. On the contrary, to be provocative against myself, I would say that safety specialists sometimes are saying, well, perhaps the small modular reactors or micro reactors might be putting new safety concerns of a new kind. To what extent is the safety regulation norm structure that we have applicable directly from the normal reactors, the traditional reactor size, to the small scale. So, but what I see definitely is that there is a demand out there, which of course explains the race to the SMR that you can see. Before, the SMR was something like good to have, or a new frontier for the industry. Now there are 70 different designs. I would say out of those 70, or more than 70, in fact, out of those 70, you can perhaps think about 10 or something that are closer to exist, and just a handful under construction. But you can see, and it's typical. You've heard people like Bill Gates and others who have been making the case very strongly for SMRs and the potential they have. So quite clearly, they are a reality. I think in a couple of years, we will be seeing the first SMRs, at least at pilot scale, being made critical.
So let me turn you now to the inspection side of what you're doing. So you went to Iran the weekend before last.
Yeah.
And I heard at a presentation you were making at the Nuclear Threat Institute last week, you made the observation that you thought that this was a pretty vital trip, that you were concerned that we were sort of on our way to confrontation, if not calamity, had you not made the trip. Tell us a little bit about that. What was your worry about that? And then we'll talk a little about the outcome of the trip itself.
Well, my worry was a little bit what you described, David, but another one, if I may add to your good description. What I said, I don't know if I said it at the NTI, but I've said it somewhere, and I believe is that we were like when you remember that the Majlis in Iran adopted a law in December last year. It's a very complex piece of legislation that has a number of mandates, obligations for the executive, and more specifically the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, to do a number of things, which include enriching uranium at 20%, having more centrifuges, revive the heavy water reactor in Iraq, and doing things of this sort. Apart from this nuclear or technological part of this law, there was another part, more concerning to me, in that there were provisions for reducing the cooperation of Iran with the agency.
Particularly abandoning the additional protocol, which is your ability to go anywhere in the country, do snap inspections for those who
yes,
don't follow.
But not only that, David. As you know, the JCPOA, famous JCPOA, has a number of JCPOA specific accesses for my inspectors, apart from those described in the additional protocol. So what they said, basically, and what they say, because now the law is in force, as you know, is that all of that is over. Basically, all of that is over. And what you have is not that the IAEA disappears from the Islamic Republic, but the IAEA is shrunk in its visibility and scope. And what we can do, all we can do, is to carry out the inspections under the traditional safeguards agreement, which allows us to do quite a bit, I must admit. But of course, it's like you were seeing much more than ankle, and then the skirt goes down again. So all of a sudden we were cut in this way. So, and the expression I use somewhere is that I felt that they had this fatidic fatal date of the February 23rd, and everybody was decrying that, but no one was doing anything about it. And we were like sleepwalking into that situation. And from a non-proliferation perspective, my concern, which I expressed, it's no secret, I expressed it to the Iranians first, because they are my counterparts in this, and I expressed it to the rest of the world, is that if we didn't do anything, we would enter like a black hole in many of these areas. Not all, but in many of these relevant areas. For example, what they're doing in terms of centrifuges, fabrication, what they're doing in terms of R&D without nuclear material. I mean, a number of important things. And my argument was, you've said, I told my Iranian counterparts, you've said that if you come to an agreement with the JCPOA or the United States, basically on sanctions and the rest, well, you go back. You simply go back. There's no problem. We go back in a couple of months. Last time Iran left the additional protocol, it took them 13 years. All right. Right. Not a couple of months.
So what you bought them was 3 months additional, right?
Exactly.
So they have basically suspended the enforcement of that law, or I don't know how you're describing.
No, because they couldn't do that. What I found, because otherwise they wouldn't have even received me. I found another way to preserve the basic information. But the additional protocol has been suspended. So
tell us a little bit about that additional way. They're going to keep the cameras running and preserve the data, but not turn it over to you, it sounds like, until such time that you're back. Exactly. And they have rejoined.
Exactly. But these cameras and the rest, there are other equipment, as you know. There are flow meters. We have other things running. They are under seals. They cannot be tampered with. Right. All right. So we have all this information, so that when if an agreement is found, then we can reconstruct what happened.
Okay. And so now, meanwhile, yeah. You have also at the Board of Governors earlier this week, you expressed your deep concern about the fact that you have found evidence of the presence of some nuclear material at 3 different sites. And you've been trying to get the Iranians to let you in and understand what it was that they were using those sites. Clearly, there was some kind of nuclear activity going on there. It may not have been nefarious, may have been somebody was just transiting with nuclear material, may have been they were producing in undeclared sites. You've been
that's another story. That's in parallel, okay?
That's in parallel, and that's been going on now, this dispute back and forth for most of the time that you've been Director General. Yeah. What are the Iranians telling you about why they won't come clean on what happened at those sites?
Well, they tell us very little, and that is the problem in general about that thing. So we've engaged. This one now is not my first, can we use the word crisis? I don't want to use it, but let's to be clear. The first
George
one I had in
Bush used to say, not my first rodeo, but it's a little too American a phrase, probably.
I like it. I come from a horse country as well. So I know what you mean, exactly. Already in August last year, they were not allowing us to access some sites, and I went there and we found an agreement, and it was about this thing. The issue being that they argue that some of the activities there are either old things that happened a long time ago and have no relevance at the moment, and they are giving also some explanations or technical explanations that I described as non-credible. What we've been trying, even from that time, is to have a forum, so to speak, or a way, to discuss it and to go to the bottom of this issue. And actually, when I was in Tehran for the other thing, for for the JCPOA and these things and the accesses. I also had an opportunity, a good opportunity actually, to discuss with Zarif and with the president of the Atomic Energy Organization, Dr. Salehi, about this. And now I have a proposal that they are considering, so we can perhaps work on that. So I'm crossing my fingers, hoping that we are going to be able to engage them on that one.
Do you want to tell us anything about what the proposal is?
Let's talk. That's the proposal.
I see. Meanwhile, you'll recall that about 2.5 years ago, the Israelis ran, actually 3 years ago now, I think, the Israelis ran a big raid into Tehran. They got to a warehouse that appeared to store records of previous nuclear activity, most of it prior to 2003. They invited me in with a couple of other reporters about 2 years ago to review some of what they spirited out of Iran. And they made the argument at that time that these documents proved that Iran did not come clean with the IAEA back in 2015 and 2016 about what their past activity was. Have they shared all of this data with you? And is it your assessment that the Iranian declaration that they made you as part of the JCPOA, as part of the agreement on their past activity, was a full declaration?
Well, regarding information, as you know, there are the IAEA has three main sources of information. One is what we get when we inspect. The other thing is information that we have ourselves, that we can get ourselves. And the third is information from third parties, from countries, which is perfectly legal. In fact, in the statute of the IAEA, it is said that when a country believes that there is some information that is important and relevant for the IAEA, it should. In fact, it's a statutory obligation. Share it with the IAEA. The thing there is that there is some kind of an urban myth that we get information and then, I send the inspectors running after whatever information we get to check whether this is true or not. And nothing is further from the truth. We have the world's top team of experts in all these things. So any information we get from any country is, analyzed from top to bottom, compared with previous information we got. And when we act on something like that is because we do have, credible indications that there is something to be asked. So this idea that we got one day, a cache of documents or whatever, and then we started working is a bit of a myth more than anything else. Of course, I'm aware of what happened and what happened with Israel and with Iran, but you will bear with me when I say that, we don't, I don't refer or compare or use as a metric for my work the information that I may have gotten from anybody. So
one last question for you before we turn to questions. North Korea is a place where you have your inspectors were thrown out many, many years ago. We believe that in the 2 or 3 years since President Trump had his meetings with Kim Jong-un, which the president at the time said would result in their beginning to turn over their nuclear weapons and materials within 6 months. We think that they've probably roughly doubled the size either of their arsenal or the amount of material they would need to build weapons. What is the current status of your efforts to get back in?
Well, all we do is to get ready, to be ready, because it's very true what you say now. The North Korea we will eventually return to has very little to do with the North Korea the IAEA inspectors last saw in 2009. The breadth and depth of the program is much bigger. There are many locations, many of course, many undeclared, some that have been identified, and of course they are now a nuclear possessor state outside the boundaries of the NPT, but they are. So the effort, the kind of work would be completely different. So we are not party to the negotiations. I think the negotiations are in the domain of countries, basically the United States and DPRK. But without us, any agreement would be just a piece of paper. So we are getting ready, and it's going to be a very big effort because of the reasons I'm mentioning. And as you know, this agency has a very small budget. Of course, we will need a lot more in terms of what we get to do the work. But I can say, ballpark, as you would say in America, the effort that it would take us for our inspectors to do our work in the DPRK will be 10 times or more what we do in Iran at the moment. So it's going to be a tall order in terms of inspectors' capacity, in terms of equipment. I know we will get the support that we need when the time comes. But we have to prepare inside because precisely to maintain our independence and our credibility, we have to be able to do the job alone.
Well, Rafael, we could go on like this for hours, and we have in the past, and I hope we will again. But I want to turn you over to some true professionals. I want to start with my great Harvard colleague, Matt Bunn, who does fabulous nuclear work for the Kennedy School. Matt?
Well, hello. It's great to see you, Director General.
How are you? It's very good to talk to you.
All right. I wanted to turn the questions back to nuclear safety for a moment, which is the theme of our conference. The IAEA, after the Fukushima accident, as you know, has strengthened some of its safety standards, revised some of its approaches to safety reviews. If you could tell us a little bit about some of the things you think are most important that the agency has done since then, and if there are areas where you think states still need to do more in order to avoid another catastrophe, if you could highlight some of the important things you'd like to see happen in the future.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think, as I was partially saying earlier, Fukushima, of course, made us redouble our efforts, but there was no Copernican change. In that, we reviewed very thoroughly and meticulously all the safety standards. There were some adjustments, like as you say. There were a number of stress tests that were carried out almost all over the world. And I should also give credit to other organizations that were very active on this at the European level, at the Latin American level, in Asia, one of the World Association of Nuclear Operators. I mean, it was an effort, it was a global effort, really, to do whatever it was necessary. And I think there were good improvements made, improvements that were perhaps necessary with retrofitting, as you know, in some places, which were quite impressive. I was visiting Besnau, which is the oldest European nuclear power plant in Switzerland, which is impressive. I mean, it's been running from 1969 and it's still there, going on strong. And they've done amazing things. And perhaps without Fukushima, all those things would have not been done. But from there to say that without all these things, we were on the verge of a catastrophe, no. I think we have to be serious and say that, but safety is a process. Safety is like taking your morning shower. You do it every day. or shaving, although I see that you have a beard. But for those who do it, we do it every day, and you cannot stop. So safety is a process. It's not something some people sometimes say, okay, what did you do? What did you decide? Are we now safe? No, we are never safe. We are always safe and we are never safe. It's something that is a constant process. And all the more so now, as we were discussing with David a minute ago, when you have the new technologies, as you know very well, and the new formats that require, even now we have floating, we have the academic Lomonosov, which is a very impressive nuclear power plant on a platform of a barge or a big ship. So that in itself brings new challenges. But I would say it's a constant process. And what I like is that I see in the regulators all over the world a great sense of cooperation. And they every time we call them, they are there. They try to work with us. So of course, complacency is horror in every sense and in every activity in life. And we are there, like a mosquito or a bee, reminding them of what is needed. And one interesting thing, maybe, just to mention something that was done, but now has grown to very big, I would say, dimensions. It's something that is really nice. It's an instrument that is really nice and is quite original in nuclear, and this is the peer reviews. We have something which is fantastic, and I don't know if any other industry has this, and in energy in particular, the peer reviews in our activity function in a way that the IAEA, under our coordination and our leadership, brings together a group of very bright safety experts from all over the world. We gather a team and we go and inspect and do and carry out a peer review. And this is like soft law, if you want, but it's extremely effective, extremely interesting, because it's not confrontational. We go to a place with these people who are reputable safety experts. We give advice, and we have a to-do list for countries. So, and this, we have now, we have a waiting list. We look like a fashionable restaurant. We have lists of countries who want these peer reviews. They need them. They feel they need them. And there is the kid with the Joneses, or the demonstration effect. If my neighbor has done it, I must do it, because my public opinion is going to ask, why are we not open to the IAEA peer review system, which is very sophisticated. We don't have time now, but we have a number of different products. I see. If I was a bank, I was telling you, we have a peer review for long time operation. We have a peer review for emergency preparedness and response. We have a peer review for whatever you can imagine in the nuclear activity. We have a peer review, and we apply it. So that is one interesting one.
Mr. Director General, I want to go to one of our Harvard Kennedy School students, Avan, if Avan is on here.
Hi.
There
Hello.
we go. Avan,
Hi,
tell us what you're studying and where you are right now, and please go ahead with your question.
Sure, thank you. My name is Avan Tinnis, and I'm a second-year Master in Public Policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School, studying the intersection of national security and foreign policy. And I'm calling in from Cambridge, actually, not too far from HKS. So my question, I think, picks up a bit on your last response, but you also mentioned earlier the importance of a global approach to nuclear safety. But as we see with many global issues, generating commitment and buy-in can be extremely challenging. So I'd like to hear more about what your approach is to engaging with different countries, especially those that may not be willing participants in the discussion, to generate that buy-in and participation that's necessary for global nuclear safety and security.
I think in the last part of my last answer, you have some elements that are, I think, go to in the direction of your question. I think there is a growing name and shame syndrome here. If you have 1, 2, 3 nuclear power plants or other facilities, and you do not subject yourself to peer reviews, doesn't look good. And there will be somebody saying, why are these people not doing this? And I will go into something that is a bit tricky these days. And one of the things that I see with some preoccupation, I must say, Evan, I start to see like a tendency to use nuclear safety politically, which never happened before. And it's not necessarily a good thing, but I don't want to name dyads of countries, but I'm sure you can imagine. And there are some countries that use the nuclear safety issue to illuminate, let me put it like that, perceived failures of their neighbors. And there have been a few, and I have been telling member states not to do that. Nuclear safety is not a political football, but it's being used as that in a couple of places, more than a couple of places. Between
Mr. General, can't that be useful in some places? I mean, I remember when the Chinese were quite concerned about the safety of the Yongbyon nuclear reactor, because if there's an accident there, it blows right over their border. I mean, that pressure could be politically useful. I
don't see them, telling me that these days. But I see other countries saying things about other countries, and urging them to do this or that, or saying that they are not respecting, rules. And it's like, I don't know if it's going to be a trend or not. But I mention it because Evan's question reminded me of this factor that is like appearing. Perhaps it will continue, perhaps not.
Evan, thank you very much. Our next question, Mr. General, is from Milis, who is a fellow in the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs.
Hello. Hi.
So my question is going back to the verification activities of the IAEA in Iran. And so you recently reported that the IAEA detected anthropogenic uranium particles in 3 undeclared sites in Iran. Are these detections likely to call into question the relevance of the limits imposed by the JCPOA on the Iranian nuclear program? Or I could maybe say, is it changing the image that the IAEA had on the nuclear Iranian program back in 2015? Thank you very much.
Well, there is always, thank you, Melis. There's always new information coming. And as I was saying, when David was asking about the information we get, we are always comparing. And also our technological capabilities grow. As it's interesting to note that these days we are able, with the detection equipment we have, to detect very small traces of uranium or any other isotopic configuration after decades in places that are, you can build a supermarket or have a farm in a place and have cattle for many, many years. And we go there, and if there was something, chances are that we are going to, and these capabilities, which are ever evolving, were not there perhaps 10 years ago. So, we are not putting into question past evaluations that the agency may have had in the past, but there's always new information. Like I was saying about nuclear safety, also non-proliferation that never stops. It's something that you have to do. It's like your tax papers. It's all the time. You have to. It's not because last year you were a good lady that next year you could not be cheating. So we have to be checking all the time, just all the time. It comes with the nuclear activity, I guess. So I don't know if it's a satisfactory answer to your question.
Very good. Our next question is from another Belfer Center fellow, Stephen. Stephen, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm there. Can you all hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, Stephen. Hello.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Thanks very much for your presentation. It's very informative and I really appreciated it. You talked briefly about small modular reactors, and you seemed quite optimistic about them in the future. And I wanted to, I don't want to say push back, but I wanted to press you a little bit on that. And the question I had is that, you know, small modular reactors have now been around for quite a while, and support for them seems to come and go in waves. And a lot of it seems to depend on economics, particularly as we see, you know, sharp reductions in the cost of solar and batteries and other things that could link developing countries into the grid, and the regulatory issues remain. So I have two very related questions. One is, how confident are you that SMRs will actually play a major role in providing global power? And the second is, what specifically is the agency doing to work with industrial makers of prefabricated designs and developing country customers on safety and security issues of SMRs? Thank you.
Good, a very pertinent question. You know, how sure I am if whether they are going to play a major role, I'm not sure. What I can tell you is that they can, because of all the issues you mentioned in your introduction. I cannot tell you with 100% certainty that they will, but the technology is there, the licensing is absolutely possible, and when it comes to the economics and the commercial side of it, that's not my domain. Although we can discuss about that and we can speculate about that, and there's a lot of material in the literature I'm sure you're familiar with, because you seem to be quite knowledgeable about this. But what I can tell you is that they can certainly play a role, and their inherent advantages are there in terms of their ability to provide a very interesting solution in developing countries, in places where you don't have highly developed grids and things like that. Whether this is going to happen or not, well, you know, I'm not an investor's consultant, but the science, the technology are there. In terms of safety and the work with industry, I think there's a lot of interaction with them. But let me say something that with my my coming into this job, I decided to bring the IAEA much closer to the industry than it ever was. I've been already in this few months, I've been talking to I would say, most of the big captains of industry in nuclear, in the United States, in France, in Japan, in Korea, in as many places as I can, because I believe that this was a deficit. This was a deficit. The IAEA as a normative place must be closer to industry. There was like a kind of taboo. No, you don't talk to industry. I think it's a mistake. It was a mistake, and people are in fact welcoming this dialogue, this possibility to that doesn't turn us into nuclear lobbyists. On the contrary, and I think for those who have preoccupations about safety, I think it's good for them to know that we are, talking to them, listening to them, and trying to make sure that they thrive, but they do it in a way which is safe, secure, and non-proliferation, compliant.
So, Mr. Director General, I know we have to return you to the Board of Governors, and I know just how eager you are to get back to them. But I wanted to ask you just one last sort of global question, and then we will free you up. And here's what it is: the IAEA was created really out of the Atoms for Peace concept that Eisenhower and so many others pushed here in the United States. And the central bargain was that the developed states would spread nuclear technology around the world. And in return, those nations would agree not to build nuclear weapons. And you were the inspecting mechanism to make sure that that grand bargain worked. My sense in Washington is that if the Atoms for Peace deal was up for passage today in the United States Senate as a treaty, it would fail. That after the experiences with North Korea, with Iran, with Pakistan, with India, with Israel, all outside, except for Iran, outside the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that people would say it's simply not worth the risk. What would you say to them today? Would you take the fundamental bargain today that we made in the 1950s?
Well, fascinating question. I think it would work in a different way. It would work in a different way. Why I say this? Because, you know, what this brings, I mean, this raises fantastic questions about, you know, fairness, equity, international cooperation, things like this is at the basis of your question, and I believe that the promise of technology transfer as a real game changer, as something that is going to bring the world into a different, better position, shouldn't be impossible. We would do it perhaps with eyes wide open, knowing that there are certain things, and perhaps, you know, places like the IAEA would have, coming back to the initial proposition of this great conversation, would have more authority on safety or more authority on security, which we have, but as I was explaining in my answer to Matthew, it's more of an incentive, peer. I don't have safety inspectors. Perhaps I should have them in that model. You know, I'm very optimistic about the idealism and the generosity that the Atoms for Peace proposition brought. And I think that spirit continues. Of course, we are in 2021. We've lost some of this innocence, but we have others still to threaten.
Well, I want to thank you for your generously spending an hour with us on issues ranging from nuclear safety to nuclear security to Iran to North Korea, for taking the students' questions. I hope that you will come back to Harvard, and I hope that when we have you back, it will actually be in Cambridge and actually in the forum where we can fill up with students to hear you. But I want to thank you very much. I want to thank the Institute of Politics and the forum for having us here today.
It's been a privilege, believe me, David, to talk to you. I always read you. I learn a lot from what you write, and also Matthew and other colleagues around the table. So let's do it, and I would be very happy if you invite me. I would love to come over and continue this discussion, which is as safety and security and non-proliferation is never ending.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chernobyl. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.